Romans 8:24 through 36. We are going to have an abbreviated version this morning, and we're going to have I'll be reading 27, 28, and 29. So I'll start with 27. The one who searches hearts knows how the Spirit thinks, because he pleads for the saints, consistent with God's will. We know that God works all things together for good for the ones who love God, for those who are called according to his purpose. We know this because God knew them in advance, and he decided in advance that they would be conformed to the image of his Son. That way his Son would be the first of many brothers and sisters. This is the word of God for the good for the good people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Now, I want you to pay close attention to the title of this sermon. It's called The Call to Serve. And I really lean heavily on that word, the, because if I had said it was a call to serve, then this sermon might be about one person. But it's not. It's about all of us. It is the call to serve. Now, I was told, don't spend a whole lot of time talking about yourself when you're giving a sermon, because people are going to start thinking you're bragging. So I want you to know that I'm going to be giving you some examples in this sermon, and the best examples I can give are those about myself. But this sermon is not about me. Okay? This sermon is about you, and I want you to keep that in mind. All I'm doing is trying to let you see some of the things that have happened to me that have made me answer that call. The call for me, hindsight is 20/20. I can look back now on my life and I can see these things have happened to me for a reason. And I've had some amazing things happen to me, just like you have had some amazing things that have happened to you. But I was so stupid I didn't know why they were happening. They were just happening. So the first thing that happened was, I got married, and I've been married for about 10 years, and we had 2 children. Now, we weren't as lucky as a lot of young couples with young children, because both of our parents lived over 250 miles away. So we didn't have any free babysitters. We had to try to find somebody to watch our children. Both of us were school teachers, so we were gone quite a bit. Miraculously, a lady showed up at our front door, and she turned out to be our neighbor, and we didn't even know her. And her name was Maxine Thomas. She kind of walked into our lives, and she fell in love with our children, and they fell in love with her. And she became known lovingly as Grandma Thomas. Grandma Thomas came over one day and she asked my wife Jane, she said, "Could you come over to the house with me for a minute?" Jane went over, and about an hour later she came back and she said, "Maxine has a lump on her breast." And yes, it got worse. It was cancerous. And it was a very active cancer, and eventually it moved into other parts of her body. It eventually got to the bone. She came to visit us one time, and she rolled over in bed in her sleep and broke her arm. And when they x-rayed her arm, it was just pitted and perforated with holes from the cancer. Well, she didn't have a lot of money, so she worked right up till the end. And she came home one day, and we always kind of watched for her. And when she got home, she finally got into the house. She had slowed down a lot. And Jane said, "I'm going to run over and check on Grandma Thomas and see how she's doing." And by the time Jane got over there, she came running back, and she said she's unconscious. She's sitting in a chair in the living room, and she's unconscious. Now, we had talked to Maxine about not to worry about what was going to happen to her. She had a brother and she had a sister, but they didn't live in the state. She was worried that she might have to go into a home. We told her, "No, you can stay right here in your own house. We will take care of you." And so immediately we called hospice. They came, they emptied out her living room and brought in a hospital bed, and we lovingly put her to bed. She lasted 4 days. It took 3 days for her brother and sister to get there. I remember she was in a coma the whole time until her brother and sister showed up. And all of a sudden she came out of the coma. She wanted to sit in a chair. We got her out of the bed, put her in a chair. She sat all day and talked with her brother and her sister. Made plans for the next day. She was so excited that they were there. And then about dusk, she began to slip back into a coma. We put her back to bed, and the next morning, everybody wanted to go eat breakfast. So I told them, I said, y'all go to the top of the hill to the restaurant, have breakfast. I'll stay here with Maxine. So I was sitting by the bed, holding her hand with my head down, praying for her. And all of a sudden, I felt something. I can't say it was a presence. I can't say what it was. It was just something different. And I raised my head, opened my eyes, and looked at Maxine, and there she was, laying on her back with her eyes just wide open. And she was staring intently at the ceiling. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's passed away, and I didn't even know it. And then I saw a little twitch in the corner of her eye. And I leaned over and I said, Maxine, are you all right? And she said, oh yes. She said, it's beautiful. And I said, what's beautiful? She said, that face, right up there. She said, can't you see it? Her gaze never wavered. She stared intently at the ceiling. So naturally, I turned and I looked up at the ceiling. I didn't see a thing. But that face wasn't for me. It was for her. Now, I'm going to tell you this right up front. I believe her. I believe everything she said, because she was a good Lutheran, and she never told a lie that I know of. I believe she saw that face. So I asked her, I said, can you describe it for me? And she said, all I can tell you is it's the most beautiful face I have ever seen. And then she closed her eyes, never to open them again. The family came back. About 15 minutes later, I told them what had happened. We gathered around the bed. I had my hand on her heart, which it beat the last beat. Now, if a death can be beautiful, her death was beautiful, because she was prepared to go to the Lord. But for some reason, I'm not going to say that miracle, because it was a miracle, was for me, it was for her. But for some reason, I was privileged to be there alone with her when it happened. So I can't really say maybe a small part of it wasn't for me. And that 2020 vision of looking back, now I feel sure it was for me. It was a call that I ignored. So another 10 years went by, and you know, Rick today is at the Walk to Emmaus. I'm going to tell you something about the Walk to Emmaus, and he told me it was all right for me to say this, but he is the spiritual director of the Walk, and he's having a wonderful time, enjoying himself, and that's good, because, I tell you, this is the commercial part of this. If you ever get a chance to go on a Walk to Emmaus, and you don't just get to walk in, you have to be invited. But if anybody ever invites you to go, snap it up. Because I will guarantee you will walk away being closer to your Lord than you have ever been in your life. Well, I went on my walk, 40 years ago in Little Rock, Arkansas. My wife and I both went. Now, we were living in northwest Arkansas, and it was a 175-mile trip to go down there and spend the weekend. So we thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could have something up here in northwest Arkansas? Well, there were a number of us, and some of them were preachers, and one of them had a retreat. And so we decided that we would start a Walk to Emmaus in northwest Arkansas. It became known as the Heart of the Ozarks. I'm very proud of it. I don't know if you can tell that, but I am. But once you go on a walk, then you have an opportunity to work walks. And I'm proud to say that outside of being a spiritual director, I pretty well held everything there is to do on walk. I just kept going back for more. It was such a wonderful experience. Well, on this particular walk, I was in the chapel, and I was supposed to be praying for the speakers. And there were 3 of us, and they would bring the speaker in, and we would lay hands on the speaker and pray with him, and pray that his walk or his talk would be well received when he went into the conference room. And then he would go out, and we would get down on our knees in front of the altar, and we would pray for the next 20 minutes, non-stopping. The whole time he talked, we prayed. Well, before I really got started with that, all of a sudden I heard this voice say to me, there's somebody in that conference room that's not going to be able to hear this message because they're in too much pain. Now, the Spirit, I was caught up in the Spirit, so I said, Lord, let me take that pain away from them for the time of the talk so that they can hear what it is you have to say. And all of a sudden, just like that, tears started rolling down my face. I was in agony. I mean, I hurt physically. I hurt mentally. I was in agony. I cried for 20 minutes. Sobbed. I hurt so bad. And then, when the talk was over, it passed. The man came back. We prayed over him and we went our different ways. But now, you can't tell me that my prayer was not answered. I learned something that day. I learned 2 things that day. First thing I learned was that our God is an awesome God.
Amen.
He can do anything He wants. He can intercede in your life if you ask Him to. And He did that day. For whoever that person was, I have no idea who it was to this day. But He wanted them to hear what that speaker had to say. And He used me as an instrument for that end. And I thank God for using me. But the other thing I learned that day was be careful what you pray for, because your prayer may be answered and it's not at all like you thought it was going to be. I've never heard that bad since. And I will never forget that day. That was the second time that I know of for sure that He was calling to me. And I still ignored the call. Another 5 years went by. Now, let me tell you this before I really get into this one. I was not in very good health. And you all see me hobbling around here and all this stuff. That's a totally different situation. I now have arthritis in my hips. That's the reason why I hobble around. But I'm going to be talking about my legs. But I had so much wrong with me. I had congestive heart failure, which was one of many. They would fill a whole notebook piece of paper if you wrote one thing on every line, and there's 26 lines, so there was a ton of stuff wrong with me. But I thought I was all right. You know, as you age gradually, you know, things happen to you, and you think, oh, well, that's the way it is to be this age. And the congestive heart failure was the most amazing thing, because I'd go to bed at night, I'd lay down, and in an hour I would wake up choking because I couldn't breathe. And I would sit up on the side of the bed, and it would take an hour for my lungs, all the fluid to drain out of my lungs. I would sit on the bed like this, trying to sleep and not being able to. Then as soon as the fluid drained out, I went to the bathroom and got rid of it. I did this every hour, all night long. It was the same 3 things. Lay down for an hour, sit up for an hour, go to the bathroom. Go back, lay down for an hour, sit up for an hour. And in my mind, I thought, so this is what it's like to be old. I had no idea. doctor told me, he said, you need to get your affairs in order because I don't think you're going to be here much longer. So I did. I planned my own funeral because I didn't want my wife to have to do something like that. So I picked out 2 preachers that I knew really well. I picked out 6 pallbearers, the songs, even the place where it was to take place. And I gave it to my pastor and I said, here, hang on to this until it's time. And then I went my merry way because I had accepted it. That was what my life was going to be like, however much longer I had. Well, I was sitting in the hallway one afternoon waiting on my wife to get out of school, and all of a sudden I felt a hand on this shoulder, and then a hand on this shoulder. And I turned and I looked up, and here was a little Hispanic lady with pure white hair standing behind me with her hands on my shoulders. Now, she was an aide at that school, but I didn't even know her name. And she leaned over and she put her lips to my ear and she said, there's going to be a miracle in your life. Now, what do you say when somebody says something like that to you?
Bring it on.
Well, I was stymied. I said, thank you. And she never said another word. She went on down the hallway. So time passed, a couple of weeks went by, and I was in the doctor's office, which I was spending a lot of time in the doctor's office back then. I was laying on the table there. My wife was over in the corner, and he's got his hands on my feet. Now, let me tell you, my legs from about 2 inches below the knees down, black as her dress over there. I mean, solid black. He's feeling of my feet, and he says, well, he said, I hate to tell you this, he said, but your legs are dying. He said, I don't understand it. You've got good pulse. He said, but you've got no oxygen going to your feet and legs, and we're going to have to take them off. All of a sudden, my wife burst into tears and started sobbing. And I said, okay. I said, well, when are we going to do that? He said, right now. He said, you can't wait. He said, we've got to take you across the street to the hospital and do it now before gangrene sets in. And my wife said, well, wait a minute. Can we get a second opinion? And he said, oh, sure. So he leaves, comes back with another doctor, and they spend about 10 minutes. Then they both agreed. They had to come off right then. And like I said, I had accepted all of this, and you do. If you're a Christian, you will accept your death when you know what's coming on, because a peace will come over you. And that peace had come over me. It didn't make any difference what they did to me. But I had to say, Doc, you remember that sleep study you've been after me to take for the last 3 years? I actually have it scheduled for tonight. And he stopped and he said, okay. He said, I'll tell you what, we'll wait 3 days. He said, go do the sleep study. If there's any change for the better, we may be able to save your legs. So I went to the sleep study that night. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a sleep study. I won't ask for a show of hands. But what they do is they put you in a little room like a bedroom and a bed and everything, and then they hook you up with this machine, a CPAP, and tell you to go to sleep. Boy, it's hard to go to sleep under those circumstances. They got cameras on you and all of this stuff. And they will come in if you roll over the wrong way and you break the suction and all this stuff. They'll come in and tell you, wake you up and adjust it. So it's not a fun sleep. But then about halfway through the night, they come in and they take all that stuff off of you and let you sleep the rest of the night, so that they have 2 things to compare, one with the CPAP on you and one without it. Then they come in and wake you up at 4 o'clock in the morning to tell you what they found out. And she took me out front. Here were all these monitors and gadgets out there. And she said, first of all, she said, your oxygen levels are dropping down to 56% at night. Now she said, if your oxygen levels were 85%, during the daytime, you'd be walking around with an oxygen tank behind you. She said, I don't even understand why you're still alive. And she said, I'll tell you, I don't think you've probably slept for 30 years. Because, you have to get down to that, what they call the rapid eye movement level before you're actually getting sleep. She said, you haven't been to that level probably in 30 years. And I did realize I was having a little trouble because I had to sign a waiver that said I wouldn't drive a car because I couldn't drive from here to Bismarck without falling asleep at the wheel. As a matter of fact, my wife and I went out to dinner one night at a restaurant, and I took a bite of food and started chewing the food and fell asleep with the fork halfway back to my plate and sat there with my mouth full of food, asleep. And she had to wake me up, which was a hard thing to do because I had no control over it. It's a strange way of living. But I had decided that's what happened to old people. So anyway, I went back. Well, I went home. She told me, she said, we've got to send home a CPAP with oxygen for you. And you've got to not go to sleep until we get you hooked up to it. Well, that was a really hard thing to tell me not to do. But anyway, about 5 o'clock, they showed up at the house, they set it all up, and they said, okay, let's go ahead and put this on you, or you need to go to bed. So they put the mask on me, and 30 seconds later, I was asleep. I slept 14 hours that night and never moved a muscle. The reason why I know that is because my wife was so amazed that she sat in the chair and watched me all night. And I fell asleep on top of the bedspread, and there was not a wrinkle in the bedspread. I had not moved for 14 hours. Well, I felt better. The next night, I went in, laid down, put the mask on, 30 seconds, I was asleep. Slept 12 hours the second night. And woke up the third morning, and I looked down at my legs, and my legs were pink. They weren't black. So I went over to the doctor's office and went in, and the nurse was behind one of these big high desks, and I walked in down the hallway to her desk, and I said, look, I don't think the doctor's going to need to amputate my legs. And she said, well, let me see. And she walked around the desk, and she looked down, she said, don't you move. I said, okay. She said, the doctor would want to see this. She went back, got him out of a room with a patient. Now, it's not often a doctor will leave a patient, but I guess, however she told him, he was shocked enough to come out. He came out in the hall, got down on his hands and knees and started feeling of my legs and feeling of my feet, and he went like this. This is a miracle. And all of a sudden, it all flooded back to me 2 weeks before when the little Hispanic lady leaned down and said, it's going to be a miracle in your life.
Amen.
I guess I had to have somebody else confirm that miracles were happening to me. Because I just kept believing, hey, that's the way the natural order of things are. You get like this as you get older. Then something happened, a few more years went by. I still didn't get it, I still hadn't put it all together. What was going on in my life. But a few more years went by, and my wife she was 55 years old. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, the worst cancer you could get. And I looked at her and I said, do you want to go back to church, honey? And she said, yeah, I want to do. So we wound up at the Bismarck Methodist Church. She lasted 21 months. And in that 21 months, I'm going to tell you, the Bismarck Church treated her like an angel. They loved on her and gave her everything she could possibly need. That's why I still go to the Bismarck Methodist Church. They won me over. And this church is the same way. I can't come to this church without dozens of people saying, hi, Gus. You all are just like that. Maybe it's something to do with Methodist. I don't know. But they're the lovingest group I've ever met. But I'll tell you, when she passed away, something happened to me. There was this huge hole in my heart. And not only that, but there was this huge hole in my life. I kept going to church because of how good they had been to my life. And do you know, as time went on, that hole in my heart and hole in my life was filled with Jesus Christ.
Amen.
He came into my life in a way that he had never come into my life before. All of a sudden, things started to make sense to me. And then I began to look back over my life, and these 3 times came to me. And I thought, my gosh, he's been calling me for some reason. Now, this word call is kind of confusing, because as soon as you stand up in the pulpit, you preach a sermon, somebody says, oh, you answered the call. For some reason, we think that word call is just for preachers. Well, it's not. It's for everyone. Everyone. Even those people that aren't here today. God calls. Now, he calls, obviously more than once. But you all have either already answered the first call, and that first call is to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, or you're on that road to answer that call, or you wouldn't be here today. That's the first call. But he keeps calling. I have this little saying that I tell people when I do something for them that they need done. I say, thank you for allowing me to serve. And as a Christian, that should be on our minds constantly. You know, Jesus got down on his hands and knees at the Last Supper and washed the feet of the disciples to show them that you have to serve. Now, who washes feet? Servants do. He said, you have to be a servant like me and wash each other's feet. That's your call. You're being called to be a servant of the Lord. Now, probably all of you have answered that call at some point in time, because there are as many calls to serve as there are stars in the sky. I mean, there are thousands of opportunities to serve. Think about it. You know, you may be good at inviting people to church. That's a call. You may be good at counseling a friend in need. That's a call. You may be good at just demonstrating through your actions what it means to be a Christian. That's a call. You may bake a great chocolate cake that when you have get-togethers, it puts a smile on people's face. That's a call. You may just simply have a winning smile that warms other people's hearts. That's a call. Dig a little deeper. You may be good at conducting church business. That's a call. Do you know how much goes on in this church before you can have Sunday services? There's a lot goes on. Somebody comes in here and fills these candles so they'll stay lit. Somebody comes in and sets up the table for communion once a month. There are thousands of opportunities to serve in your church. Serve your Lord and your church. I understand you're going to get television sets. You maybe get to have PowerPoint presentations at some point in time. It's wonderful. You'll love it. Change is hard. I'm amazed over at Bismarck how they love that. Well, somebody's got to run it. That's a call. Now, here's the point of this sermon. God is calling you. Now, you answered that first call. You accepted Him as your Savior. But He's calling you to a life of service in His church and for His church. Remember, a Christian leads others to share in the experience of Jesus as a personal Savior. That's a call, to share that experience. Do you remember the person who came to you and took you to church that first time, or invited you to church, or whatever, and got you in there, and all of a sudden you got to thinking about what was going on, and you accepted the Lord as your Savior? Now, if you'll take a moment and think about, there's somebody in your life that did that for you, and I'll guarantee you think about that person with fondness. Because they did something good for you. Well, there's still a lot of people out there in the world that don't know Jesus as you do. And if you get them through these doors in here so that they can have an opportunity to accept Him as their personal Savior, I can guarantee you one thing. They will remember you with that same fondness because you did them a great, great favor by giving them the opportunity. Share your Christianity with others. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for all the opportunities to serve that you give us. Just help us to understand when the moment comes so that we can say, thank you for giving us this opportunity to serve. We know that's what a Christian is supposed to do. We know that is our job for you, is to make this church grow. Again, thank you for your Son Jesus and what He means to us. It's in His name.